You have to remember something too. In the early '80s, nobody knew about. I mean, unless you were in the Misfits inner circle,
Right.
Nobody knew about those recordings, about Static,
Right.
the songs that are on Static Age that are not on Bullet. They were legendary. You'd hear this mysterious thing about this song. And be like, that's why I asked him, what's on Beware, because Beware was the most rarest record at that time, and I didn't even know what was on it because there was no way to look it up, and nobody I knew had it. It was so rare that none of my friends even owned it. So that's why when I asked him on the FMU show, that was like one of my top questions, because I was like, Beware. I heard it listed that they have this record, but what's on it?
Wow.
I didn't know anything about those songs that later turned up on Static Age and Legacy and stuff like that, because they just kept those in the vault. Why? I'm sure there are reasons, but I think in a different era when it's easier to put out music, maybe those things would have just come out as they were recorded instead of just sitting in a vault.
Wow, never thought about it. You just blew my mind. That's a prism that I've never stared through before. The idea that that's something we've never discussed. If they had the means, if they had today's technology, Static Age would have absolutely come out in 78 when they recorded it. Like that's really I mean, it would have gotten dumped on Spotify, like, if you think about it, really truly. What's also interesting, that's something I always try to wrap my mind around, the idea of like the chronology of how you guys like got to hear that stuff. Like, their first album to you is Walk Among Us. That's the first time they put out an album. Mm-hmm. They had a couple singles. They put out Walk Among Us, then they put out Earth AD. They had already broken up when Earth AD came out. And then all of a sudden, 3 more songs? Die Die My Darling, We Bite, and Mommy, Can I Go Out and Kill Tonight? The studio version?
I think I'm remembering it right. It felt like that was still in a fairly, one after another continuum, like Evil Live to Earth AD to Die Die, all kind of, went in a fairly reasonable time sequence.
Right.
I think that the really crazy thing I remember was when Legacy came out, because that was like, holy, whatever. There's all these early songs that we didn't know existed. That was a mind blower.
Wow. And it's so interesting, it's so interesting because, today, Legacy is not well regarded. It has a special place in my heart for a lot of reasons. There's a lot of people that don't really care too much for Legacy because Glenn, recorded over a bunch of stuff and yada, yada, yada. But yeah, it is kind of crazy to think that like, that's how people heard the other half of Static Age. They didn't get a chance whatever wasn't on a single. And then what else is kind of interesting is that people don't, when you think about it, Beware is technically the first compilation because it combines Bullet and Horror Business, but it also has an extra song. So let me ask you this. You had heard of Beware. You're trying to find out more information. What is the song Last Caress like this unicorn that people, or was that pretty...
I think, we'd heard at some point we heard about it, but I'm pretty sure that I never heard it until long later. I mean, it's on Legacy, right? Or not?
It's not on Legacy. It's on Collection 2. It's on Static Age, obviously, and it's on the box set. But it's like so hold on. The other thing too is then Metallica covers Last Caress in the 80s for whatever that EP, that covers EP, and that must have been 86. So
87.
Oh, sorry, 80s. Thank you. I'm not brushed up. I don't know too much about Metallica actually. So apart from their connection really with the Misfits, or the influence in the Samhain and yada yada yada. But what's interesting, Greg? I never really thought about this either. Glenn must have given them a tape of Last Caress, and because how exposed was anybody to Last Caress in 1987?
Not very.
Wow.
I think it was like extreme. I think I had already heard the song. Like I'd probably traded for a tape of it. But I mean, I still, even with my collection when it was at its greatest extent, I never owned Beware. Beware was like the hardest to find record. Right. It was impossible. So I never actually had a physical copy of it, but somehow I had heard it before Metallica's version. I think I'd probably traded, or or a friend taped it for me, something like that.
Gotcha.
But I was a hardcore fan. I think your average fan may never have heard it until then.
That is really insane. So there's a lot of people that might have heard the Metallica's version of Last Caress before the Misfits version of Last Caress, if you were coming up. And then it just kind of blows my mind, because people all of a sudden they're like, oh my God, I love that Metallica is covering this band, the Misfits. I need to know more about the Misfits, yada, yada, yada. But they can't even get that song until, when did Collection 2 come out? It must have come out in the early 90s. Does anybody know when Collection 2 came out? I'm kind of curious to know. Oni says Legacy has that reverb sound that you can't get on Static Age. Maybe, I don't know. Are you thinking about Glenn plays guitar he plays guitar and bass over, he keeps the drum tracks. Or maybe you're thinking of the twang that's, or that reverb thing that's kind of going on American Nightmare, which is probably the single most obscure track besides Spook City USA until, back then, really hard to come by. Oh, so check this out, Greg. This is mind-boggling. 1995 was the first time that you could get Last Caress not on a bootleg, technically. If you didn't have a copy of Beware, which means, so here's the thing. There are some people that definitely had a copy of Beware. There's some people that had the Static Age material on tape, as you said, the Inner Circle. So Last Caress definitely was circulating, and Metallica definitely got a hold of it. But if you were a casual Misfits fan who was not trading tapes, who had only heard the Metallica version, you didn't get a chance to hear the Last Caress version until 1995, unless you could find some bootleg that might have had the Beware version. So again, if anybody wants to prove me wrong, or I might be wrong about that, but from what we're trying to figure out here right now, it sounds like it's 1995. That's kind of mind-boggling right there. Oni says Cliff. Okay, so here we go. Cliff made Misfits mixtapes for the band to hear. He might have had Beware and recorded it on a tape. So there you go. That's probably the exposure.
He was a diehard fan, like a real.
Right. He was the guy who brought the band to the Metallica, and he had a Crimson Ghost, and he was in the Fiend Club, and I don't think those guys saw the Misfits live. I know that they saw Samhain live, but I don't know if they ever went and actually saw.
They might have. I mean, I think the Misfits played San Francisco. That's where they were big, so it's possible.